Welcome to Smart Manufacturing Mindset, where we explore the strategies, technologies, and leadership perspectives driving the future of manufacturing. This season, we're diving deep into the gritty details of what must be true for smart manufacturing success, covering key topics like organizational design, the role of technology partners, developing trust, change management, modern architectures, and skill development. Smart manufacturing is a journey, a team sport, and success requires every stakeholder working together to drive real transformation. This is Smart Manufacturing Mindset. Let's dive in.
Welcome to CESMII Smart Manufacturing Mindset Podcast. I'm Jeff Winter, your host, and today we're going to talk about a question that a lot of manufacturers are wrestling with right now. If everyone is under pressure to move faster on AI, why do so many smart manufacturing initiatives still struggle to scale? Well, the answer, at least from what I've seen, is rarely that the technology exists. It's usually that the organization has not done the hard work of understanding the current state and aligning it around the business problem and sequencing the right capabilities and translating that ambition into a real roadmap. And that is why I'm excited for this conversation. I'm joined by Suraj Sriram, digital manufacturing leader at Kimberly-Clark, Jim Wetzel, co-founder of NextGen and architect of CESMII Smart Manufacturing Roadmap Framework, and Tim Stuart, president of Visual Decisions and an instructor for the CESMII Smart Manufacturing Roadmap certification. And coincidentally, I'm actually also a certified Smart Manufacturing Roadmap professional. So this panel is going to be a little bit more fun for me. And Jim was actually the one who taught my cohort. So I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say. So for today, I want to explore this from three different angles. Why roadmaps matter more because of AI, what manufacturers actually learn when they go through the process, and why certification matters as a capability, not just as a credential. So let's start with the first topic. Manufacturers are clearly increasing their ambition around AI. I mean, McKinsey's 2025 COO survey found that 90% of global lighthouse network technology use cases now incorporate AI. But the same research found that only 2% of manufacturers actually would state that AI is fully embedded across operations. And that gap is the tension I want to explore first. Because the question is no longer whether AI has potential manufacturing. We all know it does. The question is whether the business, the data, the processes, the workforce, the infrastructure, all those conditions are mature enough for AI to become part of how operations actually run. I want to start with you, Suraj. So Kimberly-Clark has deployed a unified manufacturing platform across more than, I believe, 70 global sites with over something like 5,000 users and more than 300 go-lives. But when you look at that experience, what did you learn about the conditions that must have to exist before digital or an AI-enabled capability can scale across the global manufacturing network?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for the question. Great question. What I believe is essential, what in our journey was the biggest realization, as you rightly pointed out, was technology is not the blocker. The other things that are blockers are like people and process and data foundations. So within those three pillars that I talk about in my white paper, the people portion of it is about, do we have the right vision? Are all the leaders aligned across the enterprise? And do we have the right org structure and workforce to sustain the systems and technology? From a performance standpoint or a process standpoint, we talk about standardization of processes and where we have KPIs. How can we have KPIs standard before implementing technology? Because, bad data in, bad data out. So processes, and how do we have governance processes across the enterprise so that we have the right structure and then we can enable faster deployments of our standard templates. And finally, data foundations. I want companies to think about the base data foundation. Do we have historians? Do we have SCADA systems? Do we have MES systems with the right data structure? and then talk about AI or advanced analytics. And that's what we did in Kimberly-Clark. We focused on our foundation, our infrastructure base for manufacturing, data, and as well as the org structure, as well as the governance processes. And then based on value, we would focus on AI or advanced analytics. So that's a bit about our journey and how we went through our learning process. But the main learning process I want to call out was we can implement all the technology in the world, but we need to have people adopt it and realize and extract value out of it. And that's where change management also is an important foundation to focus on.
Well, I'm excited to dive deeper in that throughout this episode. But from a personal note, you earned the CESMII Roadmap certification after Kimberly-Clark was like already well into its digital manufacturing journey. So I'm kind of curious from that retrospective view.
Yeah.
What did the framework do to kind of help you recognize about like the choices that actually helped to accelerate the progress versus just areas that got in the way or created friction or created problems?
Yeah, absolutely. So the CESMII framework gave me the language and the terminologies in a structured way on what we did in our journey. I was able to put words into some of the decisions we made. Like, for example, the global template was not just a technology decision, it was a scaling decision. We had to do a global template so that we can scale it faster and standardize it across the enterprise. And then we talked about sequencing discipline. In a roadmap, you have to have the right sequence. And then that's where at Kimberly-Clark, we focus first on the foundations, the historian systems, standardized MES systems, before going into the flashy AI use cases. Not to say they're not important in today's day and age. Innovation and pilots are important, but in parallel, we need to think about how do we scale them and how do we create the foundations to scale them. So the framework really helped me use the right language, and it was a good retrospective view of how to map our journey with the CESMII language and the framework.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm kind of curious now. I want to switch to Jim because you have a totally different view on this. You're like the main architect behind the whole framework that we're here to talk about today. And so when you hear a manufacturer say, we need to move fast on AI, what do you listen for to determine whether they're truly ready or mainly just kind of reacting to all the buzz and external pressure that we hear out there?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. I hear it all the time. This whole AI, I want to start with AI. And to be honest with you, it's a red flag for me. It immediately says, I'm not sure they know what they're about to get into. So my first question really is, why are you asking me that? And what is your intent? Right? So, I don't know why AI is any different, but we seem to not learn the lessons from our past. And that is, you don't start with execution. Right. So this ready, aim, fire, we go right to fire, right? Because that's what we're good at. And so I'll push back on that question and really ask the question of why is this the question? What's so important about it? And what are you trying to accomplish? And I would say most of the time I hear crickets. They're not quite sure. And that's not an unfair answer either, because AI can enable so many things to specifically answer it and say, I'm trying to do this, is probably also too narrow. So I'll then switch to, so what is the business outcome you're trying to achieve? And let's plant the flag on that. And then let's figure out if AI is part of that journey or not.
I love that. And I see it too. And I'll just add one that I usually like to ask specifically for AI is, what is your definition of AI? Which usually starts a whole separate conversation. But I want to ask another one for you, Jim. So where do you see the biggest disconnect between executive aspiration and the plant level reality when it comes to begin their smart manufacturing or AI journeys?
In a high level view, I would say there's a huge disconnect between tactical and strategic. And so you think about whether it's AI or it's smart manufacturing kind of concepts, most people at the plant floor are thinking tactically how this can improve the flow of operations. The C-suite might be thinking more strategic about how this is going to enable some other business outcome than they would have thought of. So you have this kind of disconnect in how people are thinking about, is this a strategic effort to move our company in a particular direction, or is this a tactical effort to just be more productive?
I like that distinction. Tim, I want to switch to you. You're kind of wearing two hats here today. One is kind of like a practitioner and as an instructor, we'll say. But from the instructor lens, you see people enter this program with different assumptions about smart manufacturing. What misconceptions do some of the participants commonly bring up when it relates to how they're assessing the organization before they can move forward responsibly?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I very commonly see is that people understandably think that the smart manufacturing roadmap is all about the technology, that they're here to, list out what are the 10 different pieces of technology that we're going to look at and what order we put them in, and boom, there's our roadmap. And what we're really trying to do is to understand not only the technology aspects of this, but what is the organizational readiness? Does the culture support a data-driven process? Do you have the capabilities from a continuous improvement point of view to utilize the information effectively that you're collecting from the shop floor? And how will you be integrating AI into the process, and how do you optimize that process given those new capabilities that you're putting in place? And so that's where I think a lot of the new participants don't really understand or have a bit of a mismatch of what we're trying to uncover in the discovery part of the process, and then building the roadmap.
So what part of that methodology usually changes how the participants kind of think about readiness, especially when they realize that the assessment is much broader than the tools or the architecture or the technology?
I think one of the early conversations in the class is we're talking about the upfront assessment or the deep dive interviews. And Jim and I are emphasizing how broadly people should look within the organization for input on those two factors. And when we're talking about the survey, we want that sent out, if not to everybody in the organization, because they're larger. We want that sent out to at least a representative sample from all of the different departments in that organization. Everyone should have their say, because everyone is impacted by the performance of the operations team. And on the deep dive interviews, it's a similar thing. We're trying to get that broad base of input from people on what are the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis? What is the friction they run into in doing their jobs? So that we can look at what are the different things that we could put in place that address those things.
And that's one of the things, being certified myself, that I really like about this methodology is the fact that survey doesn't just evaluate against an arbitrary scale. It identifies things that aren't working inside that individual company. So it's one of the things I appreciate as well. All right, let's switch to the second topic, which is about how the roadmap turns value potential into sequenced work. So smart manufacturing is not kind of a productivity story anymore. I mean, if you look at Deloitte's 2025 Smart Manufacturing and Operations Survey, they found that companies that are just doing smart manufacturing initiatives, they reported a lot of different benefits in different areas. An average net improvements of 10 to 20% in production output, 7 to 20% in employee productivity, which is a whole different lens to look at it, and even like 10 to 15% in just unlocked capacity. So there's many more in there that just show that this has a lot of benefits and value. But we know the value doesn't just appear because the target state that we're going after is compelling. It depends on how well the organization defines the business cases, the outcome. They identify the dependencies that are necessary, and they prioritize the capabilities in the right order, and they translate the roadmap into funded work packages and projects with owners and timelines and requirements. So Jim, I want to start with you, because when the CESMII roadmap methodology is done well, how does it move from just conversation or a document output, from what technology should we buy to what capability must we build next? How do you change that conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question, because our legacy is to start with technology or the architecture, and that's what we need to build on. And so, because Jeff, you said it at the beginning, Suraj, you also said it as well, that the technology is no longer the failure point; it's everything else. And so the way to shift the game and to shift the conversation, and this is what we do in the framework process, and I'll do this on a one-on-one with a CEO or a president of a company, is I'll say, for the purpose of figuring out where we're going, assume that all the technology you ever needed is available. Point two, and that technology that you could pick from, assume that it's free. So that gets this whole technology solution set off the table. And because then what I really want to focus on, if the technology you ever needed and it was available and free, the biggest question is, what are you going to do with it? You are now, are blessed with riches. What are you going to do with it? And you're not going to know what to do with it until you figure out where you're going. So that immediately begins a shift in thinking and opens the door for, oh, if it was free and I had anything, here's what I wish, here's what I want to have happen. So then that helps create this future state we want to create. So then once we can continue to discuss this future state and plant this flag in the ground about that's where I want to go, this order, this concept of what should I do now, what do I need to do next, and what do I need to do in the future is not about selecting a product or a product architecture. It's about a capability that must be true. Oh, I need to have this kind of readiness. I need to address this change management. I have to get this skill level in people. I have to change this organization structure. I have to have this scope or span in the job and what the new work looks like. And so I'd say that kind of my first pivot point is to just get technology off the table and assume it exists and is free. And that opens up the folks' minds to, oh, that's right, we never really did discuss because we were so worried about the ROI of the use case of the technology. And that has been super limiting for people. So I push that aside, try to frame break that, and get them to figure out this future state and capabilities.
I love that free question specifically. That's one that I hadn't thought of before. And you're right, it can completely change the way that people think about it. So I want to kind of dive deeper on the actual process and methodology itself. So when you look at kind of the outputs of this methodology, what do you think are the most important parts that should directly feed into whether it's project requirements or investment decisions or implementation sequencing? How should they approach that? Like, I just want your opinion on like what's the most important part of that?
Well, yeah, that's as we were figuring out this process, that was a huge item, and what we ended up with is this concept of, so if this is where I'm going, what must I do now? What should I do next? And what should I do in the future? And allow you to figure out what the time period of now, next, and future is. But I think most people understand the concept of what do I need to do now? What do I need to do next in the future? And most people have turned that into annual, roughly 12 months kind of thing. And when we think about the capability building, then you're starting to dissect and you're starting to say, so what is the scope of this work? What are the deliverables of this work? What is the risk of this work? And then accountability and resource planning as to, most people have big eyes, small stomachs, right? So you go through the buffet line, you get filled up, you want to eat everything, but you can't. Road mapping and figuring out this digital journey is the same way. You go to a show and you see all this stuff and your eyes pop out of your head, but can you do all of it? And so the framework of methodically thinking it through and then putting on your constraints, figuring out, are you going to augment with external resources or are you going to prioritize which building blocks need to be done? That's all part of the process.
I like that. I want to switch to you, Tim, as someone who's done these also as well. What separates a good one from a bad one? Like when we look at the ones that we take these roadmaps and they actually turn into execution and achieve the results we want versus the ones that never even turn into an initiative or a project?
Yeah, there's a lot of different factors there, but the one that I'm going to settle on is connection. So the roadmap should be connected to what are those business outcomes? What are the objectives that you're trying to achieve as an organization? And you can look at that across the 6 critical dimensions of the roadmap, or you can look at it overall and just say, as a business, where are we trying to be? What is that North Star that we're trying to aim for? But everything that's in that roadmap should connect to those business outcomes you're trying to achieve. And ultimately, if you have that connection, it's going to drive the impetus behind each one of those different initiatives that are part of the roadmap, because you know exactly how that's tying into what you're trying to do as a business. And so that connection is really the driving factor that is going to make it a useful roadmap as opposed to something that just has limited impact.
So I want to dive deeper on that, because how do you actually help others when it comes to, there's the assessment portion of this, and then there is the roadmap portion. I would argue the assessment might be the easier portion, but the real skill kind of comes into turning that assessment into something that is practical for, it could be the leadership teams, it could be the project teams or partners or whoever is going to do something. How do you help people do that well?
I think the biggest differentiator here for the CESMII approach is the fact that this is not my roadmap. This is not a roadmap that I'm creating for the customer. This is a roadmap that I'm helping them create for themselves. And so if you're getting participation from the leadership teams, from the project teams, from anybody else, any other stakeholders that are involved, as you go through that process and you're looking at, where you're trying to get to and what are the things that we can do in order to achieve those goals, if those ideas are coming from the customer and you're helping them identify what are those things that address those friction points that we talked about earlier, then that's going to help them really translate that from the assessment findings into something practical that they can go and do that's going to make an impact for the business.
I like that. Suraj, I want to switch to you as manufacturer and as someone who is familiar with this methodology of kind of assessment to roadmap. How do you think about the sequencing across sites and across different users and capabilities so that this entire effort just doesn't become a bunch of disconnected kind of potentially local efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did was we did our version of assessment. We did current state assessment across all of our sites to understand their maturity levels, their capability that they're used to already, and capabilities they'd like to have. So we had a whole spectrum of sites where some sites had legacy MES solutions already, and some sites had no MES solutions, and some sites were just paper-based. So trying to address those maturity levels and coming up with core capabilities first as part of our platform was the first step. And then that fed the global template. So the global template was then deployed across these sites, starting with the sites that were more ready from a readiness perspective, and then continuously improving the template, adding more capabilities as we deployed to more sites. So that was kind of the balance we took from a scalability standpoint. At the same time, we don't need the pilots to stop, right? So we want innovation to still happen. So we did not stop or limit innovation, but once the pilots were successful, in order to scale it, it needs to come through the product management pipeline. So we treated this platform from a product mindset. Usually, industries and manufacturing thinks about project mindset, where you have a project, it's a capital project, you test it, you implement it, and you're done. From a software or system standpoint, it's more of a product mindset and the agile product mindset, where you're continuously evolving, improving the system, and adding more capabilities. So that's the sequence we took.
So that makes sense. And I like it, but you have lots of sites. How do you balance local urgency, especially when everyone says that theirs is the most important, with a need for kind of global standardization, governance, and repeatability?
Yeah. So what we do is if the sites have a real need, which is justifiable and has value, we don't stop them, right? So we let them run with their pilots. So we let them show the value. And then once the value is showcased and all the leadership is aligned, then it flows into the product management pipeline. And that structure helps scale it by thinking about the architecture needed, the foundations needed for that solution to be implemented across all sites and extracting value out of it.
You make it sound so simple. All right, let's switch to our third topic, which is really around kind of how certification builds the human capability to sustain transformational, initiatives. There's a famous study out there, that says that manufacturing workforce challenge makes this even more important. The Manufacturing Institute's projected 3.8 million manufacturing jobs are going to need to be filled by 2033, and nearly half of them, something like 1.9 million, could go unfilled if the industry does not address the skills gap. That means that smart manufacturing can't depend on just a small group of experts or external consultants or technology partners. Companies need more people who can connect business priorities to operational constraints, to technical dependencies, and change management into one coherent conversation. So Tim, starting with you, who should consider getting certified for this, where this is something that will help them as an individual and their company or what they're doing? Like, is this mainly for digital leaders, or should operations or engineering or IT, continuous improvement, business leaders, who should be thinking about this? Because as we've learned, it's not just for consultants. This is for manufacturers also.
Well, any large-scale transformation, whether it's lean manufacturing, digital, et cetera, is very much a team sport across the organization. That you're really looking at getting participation from all of the different teams, because they all have input and they all have skin in the game. And just like with lean, you don't just train your continuous improvement team to go do lean and leave everybody else doing things the same way they did before. It's the same thing with digital transformation. You should be thinking through how you're going to approach this as an organization. And so it's useful to have this type of knowledge across the entire organization. And so from my perspective, it should really be broad-based, especially in a larger organization, to have people with this type of knowledge in place across the different teams.
And I can see value in people getting certified just to learn the processes of how to actually integrate this across the transformation so that it's successful, even if they themselves don't actually perform the assessments. I can see value all around here. So I want to kind of, double click here a little bit, but what changes when let's just say participants in the classes that you've taught move from general smart manufacturing awareness and, hey, we learned more about it, to actually learning the structured methodology that's taught?
First of all, really important, establishing a common language across the organization and being able to communicate and understand what one person says and take that the way that they intended it, rather than using different terms and different meanings for the same terms and so forth. And the second part is having a common process. So again, as a lean guy, I'm very much a fan of standard work, and not just on the shop floor, but leadership standard work as well. And having that common approach and common understanding of how you're going to go about these things can be tremendously beneficial and a big lever to moving the organization much more easily.
I like that. So Jim, I want to ask, from your perspective, is the one who spent a ton of time in helping to kind of build this out, why was it so important for the CESMII roadmap framework and the certification to be vendor neutral and to be business first, knowing that probably almost every vendor out there offers some kind of equivalent version?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of answer that by adding on to what Tim just said. It was super important for us to come up with an evergreen process that would sustain over time. We know that technology will ebb and flow. I mean, right now it's going at such a rapid pace. If you wrote a white paper on technology 2 years ago, it's not the same white paper you'd write today. So we said, what about the process that could stay the course? And the process has to be vendor neutral. It just has to be the process that we're going to go about. And we decided that process was predicated on the fact that we're trying to drive business outcomes. We're not, no one gets a gold star because they somehow are smart manufacturing enabled or industry 4.0 certified or whatever any of that stuff would mean. The gold star is that their business results, their shareholder value, their employee happiness, all these different attributes that they would look at are going in the right direction. And so we've said, let's stick with a process that really is heavily focused on the why and the what must be true, and not the vendor solutions and so on. So business first became clearly the only thing to bank on.
I like it, but obviously I was told I took it already. So I want to kind of know, it makes sense for companies, especially that don't know where to start, but let's flip it on the harder side. What if they already have strong technology partners? What if they already have great internal digital teams or consulting support or whatever they have to think, we've got this under control, we know what we're doing? Sell me on why there's value in having kind of a common roadmap framework inside the organization.
Well, again, Jeff, the technology can move. And so by putting the name of the partner aside and being focused on the capabilities that you need, that's a stronger place to be in. So if you can reassess your partners and say, if they can't get us here, now it's time to think about looking for different partners. So that's super helpful. The kind of the bigger issue around trying to rethink or work with a company that has a lot of this stuff is to figure out, have they done it in a future-centric way that will enable this growth, or they've done it in a siloed legacy way? So you can run into a lot of companies that have, a preferred control partner, a preferred historian partner, a preferred MES partner, a preferred maintenance software, a preferred quality. And then as they look at how these problems have to go horizontal and have a digital thread across that, they can't get there from here. And so it's a pretty easy sell with those folks to talk about the maturity in moving forward, that we're no longer into this silo mentality, we're into this digital thread process, and we can use examples that they face daily about having to go horizontally across their organization. And so doing that in such a way that is vendor neutral becomes, we don't have to pick sides. We can just make the case for this digital thread, and that's a compelling argument.
Well, that's a good segue to Suraj. You're not only a manufacturer, but a leading manufacturer out there. What's the value for you of having your internal leaders who can think differently, like Jim's talking about, especially in terms of roadmap terms, not just project terms or technology terms, but changing the way that they think because of a common framework like this?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a big mindset shift, especially for manufacturing folks. Projects are, solve a specific problem in a specific site. But if you talk about a roadmap or a product, it's capability across the enterprise. So shifting that mindset internally helps the enterprise overall, and it connects the capability to the business outcomes. Ultimate business outcomes for most of the companies is increased revenue, increased profits, right? So how do we get there is by doing some of these visionary programs, things like waste reduction, your OEE metrics, and reducing downtime, and anything that we can control from a manufacturing space, and that ties to the business outcome. So having that roadmap thinking really helps the enterprise think about how do we focus resources to from an enterprise lens versus implementing point solutions. And that's where building that capability internally is helpful. So you can shift the question from, hey, what technology should we deploy, and switch it to what needs to be true to scale these capabilities across the enterprise. That's the shift that this framework helps in.
So I love that shift, but let's end with you, Suraj, on what advice you would give a manufacturer, especially those feeling pressure to move faster with AI, which I think is every manufacturer out there. What advice would you give them when they're not sure where to begin? What would you tell them to do first?
Yeah, I would say do both. Keep running the pilots. That's where you learn. That's where you showcase the art of the possible, and create awareness on the technology front. But in parallel, connect your business outcomes to the foundations that are needed to scale any technology, any system that are coming in. Right? AI is today. Yesterday it was Industry 4.0. Tomorrow it could be something else. But connecting the business outcomes, starting with honest assessment on the capabilities we need to connect to those outcomes is what I would advise folks. And that way, we can scale it and deploy it and sustain it, right? So scaling and deploying is one thing, and sustaining and adopting is more important, because that's where you have users use the system and extract value out of it. So in summary, I would say pilots show the art of the possible, foundations make it repeatable and scalable, and then change management and adoption makes it more sustainable, and that's how we extract value, and then it ties back to the business outcome.
So let's drive some real results together then. Well, I appreciated everyone that was here. I think that this was a lot of fun. We got to talk about strategy, methodology, real world execution sides of smart manufacturing transformation. And my personal biggest takeaway is that AI does not eliminate the need for a roadmap. I would argue it raises the cost of not having one. And the organizations that create value will be the ones that understand where they're starting, what capabilities matter most, and how to turn smart manufacturing ambition into disciplined execution. And for anyone listening who is interested in building that capability inside their organization, CESMII Smart Manufacturing Roadmap Professional Certification, the next cohort opens July 7th. Jim, Tim, Suraj, thank you for joining the Smart Manufacturing Mindset. See you guys next time.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.